we are back again to question a long-standing element of the game, which might have an unhealthy undercurrent to it. However, even if we investigate it and find out that, yes, it is in fact fine, at least we know that for sure, or with greater certainty, after having examined the arguments in full, as opposed to what tends to be the standard, which is just going with your gut feeling and not really subjecting it to any further thought. So, we're discussing trapping today, which of course takes away your ability to switch in certain circumstances, and that fits with the other two videos in this vein I've done recently. The first one being our entry hazards broken, and the second one being our switch moves broken. And those are both in regards to the most fundamental aspect of competitive Pokemon, which is switching. Entry hazards might make it too difficult to switch around, whereas switch moves tend to make it too easy to switch around and switch in certain Pokemon. So, trapping is the obvious next step, because it just takes that away entirely. And this one is, I assume, less controversial overall, just because of how many trapping-related strategies have been banned over the years. I'm referring to Shadow Tag being banned from OU, like, forever, and Arena Trap being banned, not just Dugtrio, Arena Trap as a whole, because people were using, like, Diglett in OU, and it was crazy. Arena Trap as a whole being banned from Gens 4 through 8. So, and obviously there were times where Shadow Tag was allowed in OU because, oh, it's just Gothitelle, who cares? And then it wasn't even Gothitelle, it was, is Gothorita the base one? Or, I know there's three. There's Gothorita, but I think that's like the Little Cup one. And then there's, no, Gothita is the Little Cup one. Gothorita was being paired with Gothitelle, and that was causing havoc too, so Shadow Tag, no one's realistically going to argue, oh no, that's fine, or, you know, like Wob, or anything silly like that. So, and Arena Trap, that one took some convincing at first, because people were like, oh, it's just Dugtrio, and then it 180'd so fast. It was going from, oh, come on, it's just Dugtrio, to banning Doug in every generation possible, aside from Advance. And there are even some people who would want to ban Doug in Advance. And so you would think, okay, well, Shadow Tag and Arena Trap, their reach is too wide, right? And when their reach is too wide, it becomes too easy to zero in on certain targets. And those certain targets would be the few Pokemon capable of checking big threats. Because big threats are big threats because only a few Pokemon check them, right? And when, so like in Gen 5, we'll take the example of the Sun team. If there's only a few Pokemon that can check something like Venusaur and Sun, or even like Volcarona or Cresselia or Chansey. And when you, there's only a few Pokemon that can reliably do so because they're good. And then when you pair them with Dugtrio and you reliably remove those few Pokemon that can take them on, that's when you have a problem. And you have issues with matchup and all sorts of uncompetitive factors. So, the idea being, okay, well, Shadow Tag, Arena Trap, their reach is too wide, but things like Pursuit and Magnet Pull, they're more limited, right? They're more specialized. And, because Magnet Pull only Steel types, and there are plenty of Steel types that Magnezone doesn't trap in newer generations, like trapping Heatran with Magnezone, while possible, not super common or likely or easy to pull off in any case. You really have to work for it if you want to make that happen. And that really only ever happens in Gen 4 anyway, with Scarf HP Ground, whereas if any gen past that, you're not giving up HP Fire. So, unless you run like sub HP Ice Salic Magnezone in Gen 5, but then still not HP Ground, not trapping Heatran. So the basic idea being, yeah, okay, you're going to trap some Steels, that's the reward you get for using Magnezone, but not only does not only do you not trap every Steel, but the Pokemon that you are going to be worse off against by losing your steel. Like, let's say Gen 5 with dragon types. The argument is basically, okay, yes, Skarmory might get Magnezone, right? Or you have to run Shed Shell or, a terrible item. But, basically, the Pokemon that you're using Skarmory for can be dealt with through other methods, right? Like, a good rule of thumb in advance is if your team only has Skarmory to deal with Snorlax, it's a bad team. Because then you get Magneton and Snorlax runs over your entire team. So you should not be relying on Skarmory for that. So, and even in later gens, when you've got things like dragons running around, it's like, yeah, okay, dragon spam stuff is scary, but it also gets destroyed by things like Alakazam and Latios and opposing dragons, Mamoswine. So it's not unrealistic to be able to, and a lot more, I'm not going to mention all of them, like Heatran, Mew, whatever. So it's not unrealistic to be able to check the Pokemon enabled by Magnezone, even without Skarmory. Whereas with the victims of Arena Trap or Shadow Tag, it was a lot more restricted, it was a lot more difficult to deal with such Pokemon. That's the basic idea anyway. And with Pursuit as well, there's been a lot more controversy about Pursuit, in that it can also feel similarly to effective. Like in Generation 5, yeah, the Lottie twins can handle Landorus Incarnate and Keldeo, but they're also one Pursuit away from just getting completely destroyed. A lot of people had complaints about Breloom in Gen 4 because so many of its would-be checks got destroyed by Pursuit. Things like that. So there's been controversy there. It's led to some Pokemon being banned. Well, I think like something like Landorus Incarnate was probably busted even without the help of Pursuit. But it definitely makes certain Pokemon a lot more difficult to play around. So it does beg the question of, I guess it might not even be, if your stance is more, if your practical stance is more, it depends on the metagame in question, then fair, and your philosophical point of view might be more, well, I think that one of the great things about, let's say RBY, where it doesn't have hazards or switch moves or trapping of any kind, you might have, you might see all the benefits of such a metagame where switching is a big part of being able to deal with the threats you're facing, which are very scary. And as soon as you impede that freedom to switch in whatever way, then opposing threats start being a lot scarier than they otherwise would be. I mean, you could make the argument that, these tactics like trapping help stop other threats, but, that argument always goes both ways. Broken Pokemon's like, oh, well, this broken Pokemon has to predict. Like, Landorus Incarnate in Oris has to Rock Slide on the switch to kill Assault Vest Tornadus Therian. It's like, yeah, okay, so you switch Assault Vest Tornadus Therian in and you get Rock Slided because it gets predicted. You can predict around anything. So, yeah, Pursuit might be able to keep something crazy busted like Latios in check, but it also will remove your ability to keep opposing things in check by targeting walls. This is like Dugtrio, for example. A lot of people were saying, oh, well, Dugtrio is in enabling stall to ridiculous degrees in Gen 7, which was true, but Dugtrio was also one of the scariest things for stall to face, because, you remove that chance of your Toxapex and the whole structure starts crumbling. So whether or not it's broken isn't a matter of, oh, it keeps so-and-so in check, or it makes so-and-so too hard to deal with, because that's always going to go both ways. It has to be accounted for on both sides, more or less. So, fundamentally, I'm not sure where I stand, because there are some metagames, like Oris Little Cup, for example, is crazy trap-oriented, and, like, the guessing games in that metagame, because Arena Trap is legal, and I think Magnepull is legal, and it's all about using trappers to enable things like the Talonflame Prevo, Fletchling, I think. Fletchling or Fletchinder? I think it's Fletchling. That would make sense based on the name. But, yeah, that's, and it's just crazy how entire games are so trap focused. Now, I'm not saying that a metagame that has a lot of trapping in it is innately unbalanced. I mean, I love DPP Ubers with all my heart, and Wobbuffet's Shadow Tag is a key factor there, to say nothing of Pursuit keeping things like the Lottie twins in check. But sometimes it does make you wonder, because it's one of those game elements that's so strong that it winds up making a lot of the game centered around it. You know, like in the hazards video, I was like, think about how many aspects of the game are centered around hazards. Or and then, you know, the switch move, same thing. So if you have things like hazards, switch moves, pursuit, those elements of the game are so strong, they sometimes kind of function on autopilot and take the game. And I'm not saying they take skill out of the equation. You have to be skillful to use them, but you have to be skillful to some extent to use anything in the game. You know, you'd have to be skillful to use Mega Rayquaza to, you know, some extent. And I realize that there's always going to be some aspect of Pokemon that just kind of plays itself and isn't going to, you know, make for the most skillful of interactions always. You know, it's not like every turn, every game plan is going to be like that. It's just, I think it's good to interrogate these kinds of things and say, all right, this kind of stuff really plays itself, it's really automatic, it's really strong, and to what extent is that healthy? And again, the answer is rarely going to be simple or, you know, easy or even universally applicable. It might be a generational thing. I will say I don't love how in Generation 8 there's no Pursuit, and then Spec Shadow Ball instantly becomes like the most spammable strategy ever. I gotta say, I really didn't care for that. Because I'm generally in favor of things that make the game easier, or not the game easier, the opposing threats easier to deal with, because the way opposing threats get stronger is a lot more overblown than the defensive buffs of each generation, let's say. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult question, and yeah, I would say that I like Pursuit usually, but and I do like that. You know, on the other hand, when you do have elements of the game that are so strong, it kind of focuses the game around them, and that might be a good thing, because when you have too many strategies that have different answers, then that kind of leads to chaos and, you know, matchup and so on. It's just finding a balance between, we need you know, some strategies to centralize the metagame around it, you know, to cleave through the nonsense and, you know, have a strong foundation for a tier, and then having them be so strong that the answer is always kind of there, because they're just kind of automatically going to do things for you. You know, get your hazards and use your switch moves to get in your trappers, and then it kind of goes from there. You know, and the power of trapping definitely does exacerbate some of the... I guess trapping isn't always bad in and of itself, but the problem is that whenever there's a strong game element, or, you know, like a big wall breaker or sweeper or whatever, or like a defensive core, that always gets made a lot better by trapping to extents that feels silly. Like dealing with Keldeo and Oris can sometimes feel really dumb because its answers are all so Pursuit weak. And I'm wondering, it might not be trapping so much as the design of the various trapping mechanisms. For example, like Shadow Tag, clearly absurd. Arena Trap, yeah, pretty dumb. And Pursuit, not necessarily always dumb, but it works so well with certain Pokemon that I wonder it might just be a certain Pokemon thing. Because I don't care for Keldeo in Gens 5 or 6, and especially in 5, because there's also Rain. It's usually Rain or Pursuit, not both. But in 6, for example, then like its answers are all so Pursuit vulnerable that you get into these silly games of, besides like Amoonguss, which actually even Amoonguss can be pretty Pursuit vulnerable when there's like a CB-Tar around. But it gets so silly because you have to go to your Keldeo answer, because Keldeo will threaten out something on your team. You know, if you're using a team entirely Keldeo-proof, then you're going to be weak to other things. That's why Keldeo is good in the first place. And it's kind of why trapping is good. You take the innately good stuff, and it's innately good because it only has a few answers, and then trapping zeroes in on that and makes the innately good stuff even stronger. So something like Keldeo, and then yeah, you go to your Keldeo answer, and then you're immediately in that, you know, game against death, where it's like, well, now the pursuit thing comes in, and you're doing silly things like slapping Colbur Berry or Reflect type or whatever, and it's just generally, I don't want to say ineffectual, but it's always on the passive side. I mean, this might just be a case of Keldeo in particular, but I would say that Magnet Pull's reach has generally been considered the most reasonable among over the generations. But over the past couple generations, I saw a couple well-respected players saying in like Gen 7 and maybe 8 as well, I think, that they think Magnet Pull just makes the game a lot, I don't know, it's not that it's outright broken, but it does cause a lot of team building strain that would be better to not have there. You know, it's tough enough to deal with all these big threats without also having to take into account the fact that Magnezone is there. Yeah, I don't know about that one. And that made me think, it sounds like a Volcarona kind of thing. Or like a Hoopa Unbound, or Kyurem Black, or whatever other like big wall breaker that doesn't really contribute much defensively, but just exists to mess up defense and make offense even more overwhelmingly obnoxious to deal with. So I guess Magnet Pull kind of depends, or kind of falls into that sort of category. So yeah, I don't know. It's possible that that's what Magnet Pull is in those generations. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily, but I don't really feel as strongly about it in general. So yeah, it's something to consider. Again, a lot of the time with questions like these, it's not really about the final answer as much as, you know, the journey towards that answer and what you find along the way. So, but yeah, in general, you're going to be hard pressed to find anyone who likes Shadow Tag. Or at this point, Arena Trap, and even, but you know, Pursuit and Magnet Pull, that's something else. I never minded Magnet Pull in Gens 3 through 6, and I never minded it in Gen 7 either, but I guess I could see how it could be kind of obnoxious. I mean, on the other hand, Magnet Pull also, well, I guess the part where it goes both ways, like keeping things like Mawile and Kartana in check, I guess that's also, that, of course it's going to go both ways, and it's going to, you know, because I feel similarly even about something like Dugtrio in Advance. Like, we had this debate recently in Advance where people are like, yes, Dugtrio can be obnoxious, but it removes defensive Pokemon more, it's more important to remove defensive Pokemon, so it makes the game more offensive overall. And even the people who were saying that were like, at the same time, defensive teams with Spikes and Dugtrio can be pretty stupid and pretty auto-win when there aren't that many off. And that is a viewpoint I'm sympathetic with, because I did make a video about why Dugtrio isn't broken in Advance. But I don't know, it's not broken, but I do wonder about it sometimes. Especially because the amount of offensive Pokemon in Advance is just not that high in general. Or good offensive Pokemon, rather. And once you get into those that aren't ruined by Dugtrio, then it's even more restrictive. Especially because if you want to run an anti-Dug measure, then that's also really, really clamping your options. And I don't think the level of power in Advance is so high that it's good to have these things kept in check to this Vice Grip level. So, I don't know, though, because then, of course, you have the, yeah, but what about Blissey? It's like, yeah, but a lot of teams get by Blissey without Dug. I don't know. I think that's a longer debate. But it's good to have these kinds of debates and these kinds of thoughts. Like, I wonder, is it too much? Is it healthy? To what you know, to make it less simple, to what extent is it healthy? To what extent is it a positive? To what extent is it just another? To what extent do you not even think about it? So I think that's pretty much it. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.